My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson, and if you've been tuning in for long enough, you recognize my, I want to say like sultry and luscious, to describe my voice. I think that's a little inappropriate. So you recognize my podcasting voice, and you know that I have today Matt Adamcheck, if you read the description or you cared to read it. And I thought this would be an awesome podcast to record because Matt has a wealth of experience coaching weightlifting, being in the weightlifting world, being around pretty much every facet of the sport. And what else could he ask for? And it started, like he said off air, around 15 years ago. So without giving too much away, Matt, how's it going? Thanks for joining me. Really excited for this one.
Yeah, man. Good morning. Thanks for having me up. Once I got my computer audio all set up and Bluetooth files actually working. I appreciate you having me on. Super thoughtful. I'm just at the end of the day, I'm just a dude up in Michigan, so I appreciate you thinking of me. Like caveat, asterisk. I've been involved, and anyone that'll tell you, it's a side joke, but I'm involved in so many things because I kind of wedge myself into them. So I'm like, hey, need a volunteer? Cool, I'm volunteering. And I kind of like volunteer tell people that I'm involved. I'm the owner of 4 Star Strength and Conditioning up in Livonia, Michigan. We're about 10, 15 minutes outside Detroit. So super convenient if you're visiting. Come check us out. It's a 4,000 square foot facility that I basically started on a whim. My background, like you said, is pretty colorful. I grew up not really even having a sports background. I skateboarded, and then once I was in the junior year of high school and decided this is the irony, I decided I'm not going to college, I'm gonna go to the Army. So I actually stopped working out and just played video games, got fat. So that was my aggressive plan to be ready for the Army, is get overweight. So quickly, while in the Army, realized, I need to be in shape. So started doing that and found CrossFit, found weightlifting through CrossFit. And then the story is much more in depth than that, but took off and just fell in love with it, man. And I continued to wedge myself into people's lives while doing the CrossFit thing. And then my transition to weightlifting, just kept doing it. And this is where I am now.
Yeah, and I love that
it's crazy to look back and think it's 15 years ago. That's insane.
Right. I love that your whole elevator pitch was, I'm a dude in Michigan. So if people listen to the first 20 seconds and they're like, what if I wanted to be coached by this guy, or what if I wanted to work with this guy? It's all right, that's super super helpful.
Yeah, exactly. One of my athletes just flew in from Missouri the other day, so it's easy. I'll even pick you up. So but yeah, man, it's again, it's a pleasure for you to think about me.
Yeah. So I would like to kind of dive into, and I think this is, just thinking about how the Army can have an influence on someone's life. I don't know many people. Well, I do know a few people who've been in the Army, and they talk about it very briefly, but not often do you get a chance to have kind of an in-depth, kind of intimate conversation about how that's kind of changed someone and then altered their life trajectory. So you kind of mentioned before, you weren't really in the sports thing, kind of got fat, kind of just played video games, and then you got into the Army. And then after you got out, you kind of took this pivot and started working in the fitness realm, got a degree in, pretty much sports science or stuff similar to that. And then worked with a bigger gym and then opened your own facility. So what was that time like in the Army? And I mean, go into as much detail as you like, but I mean, what did that experience really do for you? And are there any memorable moments that kind of stick out as huge parts of your life?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the biggest thing about the Army, like I was a dipshit. I wasn't like a bad kid. Like I wasn't out there committing like illegal crimes and stuff like that. I was a dipshit. I was your typical 16-year-old who thought he knew everything about the world. And like my dad was prior service, and I'm technically fourth generation prior service.
Mm-hmm.
And it had always been there. Like you're going to the military, and my biggest thing was I hate listening to people talk about shit that they actually don't know anything about. And like high school and college back when the wars were kicking off was just like a breeding ground for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, if I'm going to talk about the war, I'm going to go to the war. So, and I kind of already knew I already wanted to do a combat like MOS. So I ended up joining the infantry. And doing the infantry thing, went airborne. But like I really think my discipline was just lacking. I had like lack of discipline like no normal 16-year-olds. But the thing I learned while being an infantry guy and deploying, I deployed to Iraq for 16 months, deployed to Haiti after the earthquake. Like we were there less than 12 hours after the earthquake happened. I did a run at Special Forces School where I really think like Matt Adamcheck like 2.0 was during SF school. That was just an incredible event where I fucking really buried my head in the sand and learned who I was and what I was capable of. But that's like, you see shit and you do shit and you meet people and there's such oddities that when you come into the sports world from that, you have this like bar set so high and you're looking for people that are also ready to like climb with you and keep raising that bar. And it's there's good and bad, and it gets your view a little bit skewed. Like I can tell you a good story. Are we allowed to cuss on this podcast or
fuck yeah.
One of my favorite stories to tell is I started working at this gym called Plymouth CrossFit. And Plymouth CrossFit was like this small little gym. It was actually at this time waiting on its CrossFit affiliation. But my background was I had already started training CrossFit after I tore a hole in my shoulder while deployed. I got a posterior labrum tear. Long story short, my doctor died the day of my surgery. He had a brain aneurysm on a run.
Wow.
On base, not even deployed. So I showed up for surgery and they were like, he's not with us anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, he passed away. I'm like, holy shit, that's a sign. I'm not a religious person, but that's a sign from someone somewhere to not go under the knife. I went back and my commander was like, dude, we have to, like, I was a team leader. He's like, we have to get you up and running again. So I'm taking over your recovery because rehab hadn't been working. And that's where I literally learned CrossFit. I learned CrossFit from Michael J. Farmer and David Broderick. And they're both still, I would leave probably my life right now. And I love my wife. I love my family, my newborn son. But if those guys were like, hey, we're going to hell to fight the devil, I would be like, you fucking need me, sir, because I'm coming.
Wow.
Like that's just the leadership level that those individuals had. And they took me under the wing. They taught me CrossFit. Like my first workout, I was like, I have this massive tear in my shoulder. I was doing ring rows outside, and my left arm was just like flailing, holding the other ring with like this little Velociraptor 2-finger grip on the other ring to keep me stabilized. And that's where it all began. So like right there, it kind of, that mentality of like being a coach and always trying to ensure your athlete can develop started right there. It's like, yeah, I couldn't do everything, but they were not going to let me get away with not trying to improve something. And it's like, there's a lot of times athletes are like, oh, I hurt my leg, I can't train. It's like, fuck you. Yes, you can. Find something that you suck at and work on it today. And like that got buried in like a tick back then. And CrossFit was very no back then in the military. It was like this new wave of what the hell are these people doing in 2006. So we fought really hard and eventually got like our whole battalion at 2325 at the 82nd to switch over and buy in.
Wow.
And we were like, Alpha Company was just kicking ass and taking names. We were beating every one of the battalion command sergeant majors, like good old PT boys, with like our worst out of shape soldiers. It basically became like a slaughter. So then they finally bought into it. So I started instructing down there, did some presentations in front of the brass down there. And then I got out and was like, hey, I want to keep doing this. So I go to this gym And they're fortunate enough to like be like, yeah, we'll hire you. Like, you have a great resume. You've coached a lot. We're looking for a new coach because we're expanding. Perfect timing. I interned for like a month. I'm driving in every morning to do work. And then they finally leave like a Saturday class to me. So I'm like, cool. Like, let's get fucking lit. So I'm like amped up, and I got the vibe of the gym, but I don't know everyone. And the Saturday classes are always big. Back then, like a big Saturday class was like 12, 15 people. Now you go to a gym, it's like 35 people. But they're doing this WOD that was like a Christmas workout, and there's 12 push-ups because it was like the 12 days of Christmas or whatever. And I sit there and I see this group of women like in shape soccer moms for CrossFit, and like they're doing their thing, and I respect them for doing their thing. And I got like a bug in my ass to try to like amp them up, and I went like I should have gone left, but like I went hard right, and I literally look at them and I yell over them like, "What is that? The fuck you push up?" And I like walked away, and the next day I almost got fired. I was told to like take a week off work. I almost lost my job, and this whole story would have probably never happened had my bosses not like understood that I was just a big dumb army grunt still needed to adjust. Right. But so a lot of learning there. But really the military, it taught discipline, man. And I try to instill that into my athletes and get them to understand that there's like good and bads, highs and lows, and that's always going to happen. But like, you know, there's other variables of like, you have like your athletes that want to show how hard they are. And you actually, you know, they're making a bad choice by having like a potential hip labrum tear, but being like, well, I'm tough. I want to go train. You're like, dude, you're being dumb. And it's like, I have stories from the military from people that were like, you know, they got messed up. They got messed up in Iraq. And we're like carrying them to the LZ to get them out of there. And they're like missing appendages, and they're still firing back at the enemy. And like, you have stories like that to sit there and like sit your person down and be like, listen, you're not hard. You don't need to be hard. Like, you need to be smart. So I have tales like that. I got to see, like I said, in SF school, like I saw how far the human brain can go and then how far the human body can go. And that's where I really take a lot of my coaching concept from, is like, so many people are so not eager, but like ready to give up on themselves. Right as they're like past that, they're like, all they have to do is turn the door knob a little further and they'll be fine. And that school just brought it full force. So I got to see kind of where the human body can go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I'd actually love to unpack, because for me, I kind of hear about a few attributes that, one, you developed, but I think when we talk, you know, as coaches, it always comes down to how do you communicate that and transfer it to the people you're working with, unless they, you know, they've already kind of developed those things and meet you where you're at. But how do you work on communicating that like sense of fearlessness or discipline? And do you find that you're for everyone, in the sense that like your coaching style, obviously you've had the experiences you've had and they've shaped who you are, and the way you communicate that, you know, maybe it's intense and uses colorful language, but do you find that it's hard to, one, just work with everyone and be for everyone? And do you try to do that, or is it like,
you know what, I used to try to be for everyone, especially like when I was CrossFit coaching. Because like before I even opened up 4-star and before I even fully committed to weightlifting, I was running Plymouth CrossFit as a manager, and I was like one of the head coaches there, and it was one of the largest CrossFit gyms in the country back then. And we had like, between both gyms, we had like 300 members, and I was trying to be for everyone. And it's one of the things I hated, because I couldn't coach people the way I wanted to coach them or preferred. And I'm not, even nowadays here at the gym, like I'm not for everyone. And I'm very open with that. Like, go ahead and play around with different coaches, see who's a better mix for you. The thing at the end of the day is like, work is work. And this sport is repetition. It's repetition and practice. And that's just what it comes down to. So you can not even like who you're working for. Like, I guarantee you the Chinese athletes don't like every national coach. I guarantee you, you know, Team Spain doesn't always get along with Matias. But they respect his knowledge, they respect his background. And that's, again, another line from the military is you respect the rank, not the individual. Because to get the rank, or AKA the position, you have to have some sort of bona fide experience. And it's like, you don't have to be best friends with them, but they've probably done it and worked with other athletes and gotten them to a position or gotten them better. So at least trust in that. I'm not asking all my athletes to go for Saturday night drinks and socialize and talk politics. And I actually rarely do that with anyone. But yeah, like the thing I appreciate the most and where I think I'm most successful is like, I don't care if you're a beginner. I don't care if you're the most senior athlete in gym. I respect just work ethic and work. And if you are a newbie and you're willing to sit in the gym, and if I suggest, and it's the little things, man. It's like if I suggest like, hey, I think for your back, you should probably at the end of training do this and this. And then I don't see them doing that, but they just complain to me for 10 minutes about their back or how they have like a shitty overhead squat position. It's like, well, dude, you're just wasting my time. Like, you just asked me for the solution. I just gave you a potential solution. You didn't even try it. Versus like the athletes that come in, they're like, I want it. I want everything. I want to go to the top. I want to be the best. And I'm like, okay, cool. Everyone says that. That's an easy song to sing. But then I sit there and I noticed, they come into the gym and they foam roll, they stretch, they mobilize. They ask me, am I their coach, for tips and tricks. They do those tips and tricks. They hit us up, telling us about their nutrition. They're coming to us, talking to us about like, hey, there's a clinic here. What do you think about it? Hey, can we sit down and talk about my programming? Because I want to be involved. I want to know what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. Not in like a disrespectful sense, but like they want to buy in, right?
Right.
Those types of athletes, like, okay, that's work ethic. And it's no different than, I watched a Kobe thing, and he was talking about like getting done at games and literally getting home and getting back on the court practicing the next day. Everyone else like that weekend would go celebrate and relax, and he would get right back on the court and start practicing. And it's the same thing. I respect it personally because when I was in the military and training for schools, like we'd get done with morning PT, go eat, go to work, do whatever ranges we had to do or whatever that day. And then at night I'd get back in the gym for another 3 hours and then go to bed and restart the whole day, because that's what I was trying to do. That's what I was trying to accomplish. So that's like where my military background, I definitely respect and see that in people and can kind of filter out like who's recreational and who's not. And I'm all for recreational weightlifting because I want to have a job if it wasn't for recreational weightlifting.
Right.
I'm not for the people that say, I want to be better, and then they just don't do the follow-up actions after requesting the follow-up action.
I mean, it sounds like, you kind of graduated from that experience, I guess, working, from being in the Army and then working for that big CrossFit gym. How was the transition out of that, like out of CrossFit Plymouth? And then, just over this span of time developing as a coach until kind of where we're at now, where you have your own facility, as far as I'm concerned, respected as a coach, knowledgeable, producing good athletes, like very well developed. There's a large span of time where I'm assuming it was just a lot of work, putting your head down, trying to figure all of this shit out.
Yeah, we talked before, like the podcast, like I'm just obsessed with it. Like, and not in like there's like over the top obsessed where you're like trying to get towels that Lasha wipe the sweat with. I'm not.
That's my buddy.
There's more than your buddy. It's terrifying, actually. It's honestly, I fell in love with weightlifting more than anything because it's exactly like shooting. The side by side comparisons, like in a long distance shot, man, you trigger squeeze too hard, it goes left or right. You breathe wrong, it goes up or down. And a hair wrong where you're set up is meters wrong downrange. And weightlifting's the same. And it doesn't even take someone that shoots to understand the difference. Like, you have your knuckles turned the wrong way in your setup, and that lift's going to get affected by it. You have your back not set as tight as it should be, or you don't move as quickly as you need to, and it just throws the whole lift off. And I just love that comparison because it's such minutia detail, but it really does make an important part. And basically, I started falling in love with weightlifting more and more. I was a regionals level athlete back in CrossFit back in the day, so I'm not that great of an athlete, but I'm proud of the work I did. And I was one of the stronger lifters, and I kind of fell down that rabbit hole because a guy named Lars Anderson came to the gym, and Lars was like a weightlifter. He was a weightlifting coach. He had like traveled and trained with some pretty cool people like Team Mexico when he was down there working with the automotive, and then Team Japan. And he taught me weightlifting, and like, I mean, literally to the point of like, after training with him for like 2 months, he pulls up one Saturday, and this is a cool story. Pulls up one Saturday and like throws this thing at me, and I open it up. It's a goddamn singlet. And he's like, "Put it on. We're going to a meet." I'm like, what the fuck do you mean a meet? I'm not ready for a meet. I barely know what a meet is. And he's like, cool, don't care. So we drove to CrossFit Oakland County, and I did my first weightlifting meet back then. And like, I just got thrown into it, which is funny because that's basically how I do it to our athletes now. Like, oh, you've been a member for 2 weeks? Cool. There's a meet we're hosting. You're doing it. So I fell in love with the gym, but I really liked the weightlifting aspect, and he taught me a ton. And he was always very patient and like simple, and he knew I was a big dumb brute, and that's how I'd been getting by. And he's like, you have this big engine, but like you don't have the housing for it. Like you need to start getting a little bit of more technical refinement. So he worked with me, and he was very patient, and we worked like after hours. Like he would get off work, and the gym would close at 8, and we'd work and like just head down from like 8 to 11 at night, like 4 days a week. And then I'd be up at like 6 o'clock a.m. the next day to teach the 6 a.m. class. So learned a lot from him, and that's where I really started getting educated from like technical movement for myself doing it. And then I went to my bosses like, hey, I really like this weightlifting stuff. Can we do a weightlifting class? They're like, sure, but we want you to get USAW certified for legal reasons, yada, yada. I was like, okay, that's fine, whatever. You're going to pay for my course. Let's do it. So we host the USAW, and the assistant instructor is this guy named Bob Morris. And the other instructor came and did it, but this assistant dude, I was all about. I was like, he's cool. He talks with very few words. He reminded me of my cadre in the military. Like very few words, but execution-wise, like perfect. So I'm talking to him, and ends up he lives like a mile away from the gym. And I'm like, wait, you were the head coach of the OTC. You're one of the most recognized coaches like in the American weightlifting scene, and you live a mile away. I basically told him he's working for me. I was like, Bob, I need you to be here every Saturday at 9. And he's like, how about 8? And I was like, 8, I don't give a shit. 2 a.m. Like, when can I get you to be here? So that day forth, like Bob started coaching. And he was working at U of M with Bo Sandoval, helping there. And he started working with me and our weightlifting crew at PCF. And like, it became a relationship that lasted years and years, man. And it was so nice. It was so good. I got to learn from him. He was very open to me from learning from other coaches. And he knew about Bud Charniga, and I knew Bud from getting involved in the weightlifting scene. And Bud lives like a mile and a half from where I live. So I started like playing around with Bud's garage every now and then. I'd go over to his house and sit down, and he would talk and show me a bunch of files about like weightlifting mechanics and positioning and the books he was translating or books he was writing at the current time. I mean, everything down to like how the female barbell is like pretty much unsafe. And like just stuff like that. And it was like just this big learning boom I did from like 2010 to 2014. I was just hunkering down. Then the last kind of hurrah I did was I reached out to a Pan American coach that I loved I was really into the Russian weightlifting scene because their stuff just makes sense with me, the Russian weightlifting physics concepts. So, and with Bob explaining what he learned from Dragomir and all that stuff, it was just like, I was already like planted in the tree. So I reached out to this guy named Ivan Rojas, who ran Risto Sports back then. And he'd produced multiple Pan American level athletes and worked with coaches from Kazakhstan, China, Colombia. He worked with the coach I'm working with now, Carlos Andica, and Yoni Andica, and a couple others, Vanessa Conones. And like the guy basically is in Maine. He's in Maine, and it's like dead of winter, February time. And he's like, yeah, you can come train with me. I was like, fuck it. All right. And I had already done this with Graham Holmberg, like in 2010. I reached out to Graham and Brandon Cowden, and I was like, when they were Rogue Gehenna, like that's way back when. And I was like, I want to train with you guys. You guys are the best. I want to train. And I show up and I'm like in jeans, and Graham's like rowing in the lobby, and he's like, grab a rower, let's go. And I rode like, I think it was like a 5 or 7K in fucking jeans and dress shoes. But I was all for it at that point. I was just like, yeah, game on, let's go. So I'd already like done this emailing pattern of like, you shoot an email out and you be fully prepared to be denied. But the best thing is you get accepted and put yourself on the line, big risk, big reward. I did the same thing with Ivan, and Ivan like called me up, and I got to train for like 2-3 weeks in the dead ass cold of Maine in February in this little industrial shop. I almost died every day on the way to training because I rented like a Dodge Charger in Boston thinking that was a cool car. It does not drive well on snow and ice. And he had like this 14-foot hill you had to drive to get into his driveway. And I would skid down this driveway and almost die every time. But when I did get to the training hall, I trained twice a day. I got to train with Vanessa Conones, who's like a really well-known Colombian female, fast as lightning. And she was lifting my numbers back then. Like I wasn't anything special. I never have been, but it was very humbling every day going to training, having like this little 56-kilo girl just beat the shit out of your numbers in front of you for multiple reps. And then I got to train with Elio Guerrera, who was a Cuban that had fled Cuba. You can look up like the 1994 Pan Am, I think it was Pan Ams that were in Chicago. And he was in the 90s class, and you can watch him lift, and this dude smoked lifts. He was so goddamn fast. And I got to train with him for 3 weeks. And I didn't speak a lick of Spanish, and they all spoke Spanish. So it made it even more complicated to understand what the hell they were teaching me. But Ivan like sat me down and taught me programming. He taught me how the Russians taught him, and his teacher was a very smart sports scientist doctor that ran like all of Cuba for the Soviets. And then that guy's teacher was Mendeveev. Like this is a direct lineage tree. So like I was learning from what I felt at the time and still do like the purest Russian sports training that you could get. It wasn't bastardized by like translations or the internet, just personal opinion, which is going to happen anyway. But yeah, so I trained with him for 3 weeks and I learned how to program like not a child and actually understand volume and intensities and long-term programming for like 12 weeks to 3 months and break all that down and how to get a new athlete and pull their numbers and run a little bit of data on them to see what they needed, whether it was more strength or more technical work, stuff like that. It was really cool. And I learned a ton. And then he mentored me beyond that. And still I can reach out to him today and get information. Him and his wife helped me. It was just a great experience.
I mean, so, I'm absolutely captivated. This is incredible. I kind of wonder with all of that. I mean, what I found, it can be difficult, if you read a lot of the Russian text and you talk to a lot of coaches, I mean, you get a lot of kind of programming theory and examples of how to program and styles of programming and styles of, technical execution and developing technique. And how do you juggle all of that information and create some sort of like coherent system rather than just having like 20 people and trying to use things that like 20 people say? How do you find what works for you?
So for me, what I always got out of them was at the end of the day, like they like to compare it back to my military thing, which I respected a ton. They respected how I learned, which is one thing I do here is I try to look at what type of learning style a person is. Like sometimes people are visual learners, sometimes they're audio, like auditory. Sometimes they need that tactile feedback, which is super hard during like COVID era. But like, man, the amount of times, and I'm kind of getting off real quick on a jargon, but like the amount of times I see a coach just sit there and keep talking to the athlete and it not working. And it's like, dude, just go fucking demo it for them. They're a visual learner.
Right.
Like I can sit down and look at my athletes, most of them, and be like, you're tactile, you're auditory, you're visual. And then it helps me coach them because we don't do I don't get it, like that bullshit. We're just right there into but they respected how I learned and they kept returning back to the gun. And it's like, at the end of the day, everyone is fully capable of grabbing an M4, putting a 30-round magazine into it and shooting it down the direction of the target. Everyone at the end of the day is capable of picking up a barbell and trying to yoke it over their fucking head. Now let's define what actual technique is. Is everyone capable of doing the shot right to hit the target at a 100-meter target? Is the athlete capable of correctly and safely getting the bar to the overhead position? And it was so smooth, just how they explained it to me and helped me understand that way. So at the end of the day, like it's always got to come down to technical prowess and movement. And you're not going to have like your first athlete that's, 3 months into the sport moving like, Toma. You're not going to have her moving like Lydia or Lasha. Are they doing it moderately correct? Because they will tighten up with more practice. So then after you're comfortable with them moving a bar right or moving light load right from the hang positions and from the floor for both variants, power or full, then it has to become volume. It was always about volume in the Russian weightlifting program. And you see the Bulgarians took that and kind of went way overboard with it, in my opinion. But so you have to have technical movement, and then you have to have volume, because a lot of things that I think American coaches get wrapped up on is the chase of the big numbers, like we were talking earlier. And like, how many times does a baseball pitcher practice his pitch a week? Like, how many times does a football player throw the ball if they're the quarterback? How many times does a golfer practice his putt? But then, like, there's thousands, right? Without any argument, a tennis player is going to sit there and hit the ball thousands of times a week. But in our sport, for some reason, we see people getting wrapped up in like, well, we'll do 14 reps of snatch today, and you'll build up to heaviest. Like, it's just not enough sure practice. And when you look at the human body, how it works neurologically, like it has to have that path trained over and over and over and over again. And then you get these really cool things where the human body starts to self-correct because it doesn't like a certain position. And so it starts to make the adjustment and tighten up on its own because it knows more reps are coming. And like, so it always started with like technical movement at the start, then volume. And volume's hearsay. Like, volume has to be done right. You can have a volume do 70% multiple times, but if it's shit, take it back down to 60. And if you're afraid of hurting people's feelings, that sucks, because coaches need to learn how to say, no, this is what you're doing, and not just be soft and go with what the athlete wants, because they're literally paying you for your expertise. So that was basically, that's kind of what I've rode on the whole time. And then once those things are happening, just with the volume going up, the intensity is going to go up with that, right? Okay, you slammed 5 sets of 3 at 75% easily now for 2 weeks. Like, let's go up to 80%. And that's where you start to play around with like your different variables of like, okay, is 80% a good training threshold? Is 85% a better training threshold for this athlete? And that's where I really learned from those guys and how I kind of just base everything off. And all 3 or 4 of those people talked within the same realm of that. So I just, why reinvent the wheel? They've done some pretty cool coaching things.
Yeah. I mean, to even talk to your point earlier about kind of meeting the athlete where they're at with their technique. I was listening to a podcast you did. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but you just talked about kind of hitting a new personal best, right? You put 5 kilos on a lift, but that doesn't mean that suddenly you're prepared to hit every single weight up to that PR with the same technical precision that you could hit, 80% with before, right? So
yeah, it changes the whole agenda.
right, and this is exemplified, or even magnified with beginners, because I'll have someone take the bar over and over and over, and I'm not saying we'll perfect it, but it'll look reasonable, and it's like, okay, let's put the 2.5 kilo plates on, and then it goes to hell. I mean, it literally looks like shit, and you can see the difference in mastery between the below threshold weights and the weights right above threshold a little bit more clearly. But I don't think people recognize that if you hit a 5 kilo snatch PR, like, it's not 1-to-1. You have to bump everything up and start training heavier and harder. It's more so like, let's ease into those new weights. And an analogy my buddy Kevin can give is he kind of mentions it as though you're letting the fruit ripen on a tree, or it's like a storm kind of growing in the background. It's like it's kind of present. You don't know it's there, but it's developing over time, and then finally it'll kind of raise up to the level of your capabilities. So I think that's just an important point to make. But
yeah, we just hosted a USAW up here, and one of the questions during the Q&A was, and I loved it because like my other coach Tracy looked at me and she knew exactly how I was going to answer it because she lifts under me also. Like the athlete, we got done with the programming section. We're talking about different programming types that, and like an intelligent coach goes, "How do you know when an athlete's ready to PR?" And I looked at it, I smirked, and I'm like, I make them fucking beg for it. Like a hungry dog salivating at the mouth. Because then it shows me two really important things. It shows me, A, that they're confident enough to come up to me and ask for it. And then B, they've probably hit everything flawlessly or close to flawlessly up to that multiple times to have the confidence to come ask me. And like every now and then I'll sit there and I'll be like, hey, today we're going to test. But very rarely. And we can talk about that later on like that open source stuff I was chatting with. But like, it's just I have a way higher rate of return on people testing when they come to me and they're like, these are feeling pretty good, versus the old approach of like, all right, one at 90, one at 94, one at 98, one at 102, one at 104. Because that like fucks with people's heads hardcore when they see that, oh fuck, I'm maxing today, versus just let it kind of happen on that natural route. So yeah, and then you put on that big PR, and then the next week they come back and they're like, oh, I'm feeling really good. I'm like, well, your 80% was kind of shit today, so I don't really know if we should do that. So why don't we do like 2 doubles at what you're at now? So
yeah, well, and you kind of, I guess, explained for us your development as a coach under other coaches. But when did you?
I've been lucky, man. I've been so lucky. Like, I think those guys times over. And the funniest thing is, and I love saying this, and like I've talked to other coaches. I've talked to a ton of coaches. Like since that time, I mean, I've talked. I have an open door with like Greg Everett, and I can message him, and he helps me a ton when I need it. Danny Carmago's helped me. Kevin, he's helped me with things like that's the cool thing about USA Weightlifting now, that anyone that's listening to this, getting in this sport now, is it was not always like that, guys. It was a lot of like, this is my dungeon, this is my secret method. And like now these guys are so willing, Piros and Mike, you can just DM. So many good coaches out there that are really willing. Spencer, like, I'm just going to keep name dropping because these guys are so helpful. Because I'm not afraid to sit there and be like, I don't know as much as you. Please fucking help me.
Right.
And I think a lot of coaches are, which is shitty. They're like not humble enough. But if being humble is going to allow me to learn more to help my athletes more, then I'm all in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many podcasts I've recorded with myself and a guest, or my buddy and I on the Weightlifting House podcast and a guest, but people will literally give us 3 hours of themselves just detailing the way they write a program or help someone develop their technique, like Max Ada and Spencer Arnold and Sean Waxman, and I mean the list goes on and on and on. People are just incredibly willing to explain.
It wasn't like that, man. It wasn't like that back in the day.
It's crazy to think about it like that because people now are just so willing.
Yeah. No, I've been super fortunate.
But obviously, just because you have the information doesn't mean you're going to be able to apply it 1-to-1.
For sure.
We talked a bit about coaching personality, coaching style, and I think developing that, refining that, being able to deliver the instruction to the athlete, communicate it well, have them understand it, help them develop the skill of training, right? When to make good training decisions, when to pull back, push forward, thinking about how this will affect the next training session. I think those are things that take more time. And it's kind of the reason I wanted to ask the next question is you spent all this time developing under coaches. When did you find yourself actually breaking through, right? Being able to produce and being able to put all of this work into practice and see it actually, develop the fruits of all of your work the 5-10 years before.
Yeah. I mean, I had like played around with coaching and doing the CrossFit coaching stuff. And then when I started at PCF, kind of their weightlifting club, my first club that like, it's like a hidden ex-wife. Like people don't even know I had a club before 4-star. I had Accelerate Athletics Weightlifting Club is what it was called. And I had a group of like ragtag kids, like they were like 16 to 20. And they just trusted me. And we worked our asses off and got them all qualified to lift at the Arnold. And they went down and lifted at the Arnold. I guess it's not even qualified. They went down to the Arnold.
Right.
But like they were super young. The gym had seen us kind of doing our own thing in the corner. Like it was like we were this extremist group. We were only weightlifting in the CrossFit gym. And I took them down there and we just had such a fun time and had such good lifting. The kids did really well. They enjoyed it. And just like coaching all 5 of them and like sitting back that weekend after I never have done it, like any of that. Like I had ran through a local meet one at a time, but I never ran like that many at that time. And I sat back and I'm like sitting there drinking a Jack and Coke. And I'm just like, that was fucking sweet. Like all those kids got better. And we proved that today. And now I get to drive back up to Michigan and like show everyone that like weightlifting is a thing. Because we were like the jokes. Weightlifting wasn't a thing back then. And like the Arnold's my birthday too. Like it's always that birthday weekend. So it was even like better because I was sitting there on my birthday, just like reveling and like, I'm making this thing a fucking thing. So then I got back and I was like, I talked to my boss. I was like, I want to make this a thing. And they're like, well, we're kind of a CrossFit gym. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make it a thing. And I kind of gave them the first hint of like, I'm going to do this and start getting out of CrossFit. Because I had reached a point to where like, I'd been coaching CrossFit since 2006. It was 2014 at this point. Like I was like, I'm going to hang myself with a band if I have to teach another kipping pull up. So I was like, all right, cool. So I started like making aggressive moves to start the weightlifting side, and it came to toe, right? Like you can only do your own thing for so long.
Right.
So we decided to leave, and I actually didn't go and open a gym right away. I was looking at that time going back to a paramilitary service. So I interviewed with a couple of 3-letter agencies. I interviewed with Anchorage PD, Miami PD, and then LAPD was the most appeasing. And I ended up flying out to LAPD. And I actually, long story short, I spent like $6,000, like what I had in savings, flying back and forth 3 times and staying there for extended bouts to do the interview process, and then was no-go'd at the end. So I had like not much money to my name, and I had no job, and I had a really, really nice girlfriend at the time who's now my wife, who was like, yeah, I support you because you're fucking crazy. And she still knows I'm crazy, but still supports me. So but yeah, and I like sat back, I talked to Amanda, and I was like, I really want to do this weightlifting thing. And like, I had been told by the weightlifting people here in Michigan that you can't open a gym. You can't open a gym and just run a gym and run weightlifting. I was like, no, fuck you guys. Like, I kind of took my mentality I had back in the Army that got me in a lot of trouble of like, I'm not going to listen to these fucking experienced people. I'm gonna do something new and ride this wave of weightlifting because it was starting to pick up. People in CrossFit were like, weightlifting's cool. So I was going to ride this wave. And I started talking to people, making business plans. Like my whole, every moment of the day was dedicated to getting this gym up and running. I had no business practice. I had started my own apparel company with someone else, Jekyll Hyde Apparel. Go check them out. They're a fantastic company. I sold my part to pay my debts to the gym, yada, yada. but my buddy Tim Van Dusen still runs them. Awesome fitness company for apparel. But my whole computer room was covered in sticky notes. And I had like sections. I had programming, class schedule, program plans, like what I was going to do, how to get it done, how I was going to pay the bills. Like it was this Dexter-esque lab I was living in, but I had no money. And I definitely didn't have money to buy a bunch of equipment. So I ended up reaching out to Bud Charniga, who was a DHS supplier. And I like DHS equipment. I have nothing wrong against it. And I went and I just sat with him. I was like, Bud, here's what I'm trying to do. And he's like, you know, you're fucking crazy, right? I go, yeah. He goes, you know what that means coming from me, right? And I go, yeah. And he's like, but you're genuine, Adamcheck. You want to see the sport grow. He's helped me a few other times with some other things. He's like, I will help you. And I shit you not, like Bud, people give Bud a lot of crap, but Bud has done a ton for the sport. And then on top of that, Bud gave me on a 4-year loan with 0 interest at a discounted rate, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5, but sets of DHS training plates and barbells. Fucking handed it right over, man. Wrote the contract on a piece of paper, handwritten. And it basically said, like, you'll pay me back at some point. Fucking find me someone that will do that. And like trusting a no shit, no one behind my name coach. He had just seen me coach and knew I was passionate about it, and I would figure out a way. So like at the end of the day, I owe Bud eternally. And then 2 of my buddies, I sat down, I told them the plan. They were both gym rats, and I was like, I need a short-term loan from you guys to get this thing up and running. And they gave me, like, I'm not afraid to say it, I think they gave me like $2,500 each, plus like the $2,500 I had, and I found a place to put the apparel company at the time and like have the gym on the bottom floor, and that's how it all got started. And at that point, shit got real, right? So it's like, this is my fucking, I owe people money. I owe this dude over 10 grand in equipment money. And I have a bunch of people that are hoping it works. So I opened 4-Star.
Wow. And
like every ounce of money and my soul was in it. My fiance now was counting on me to be successful, because I was like, yeah, everyone says you can't have a career and make money on weightlifting. I know you love me, but I'm going to do that. Sick. Good job. A solid buy for a husband. But yeah, it's, and that's when it was like, all right, so all the cards are on the table, Adamcheck, like you got to be a better coach and keep finding ways to be a better coach. And it just kept growing. I kept working with more coaches. I kept inviting more people to the gym. I kept inviting more CrossFit athletes to come work with us. And it just grew, man. And literally within like 9 months, like my coaches were helping me at that time in the gym, and we expanded to this newer facility in less than 9 months. Like it just grew like wildfire. But I at the end of the day, the only thing special I did is I just cared about my athletes. I didn't sit there and like ride the coattails of like, oh, I raised so-and-so. I was so-and-so's coach. I knew from being a leader in the military and any leadership books I had read or what I'd experienced, going way back to when I was talking about Michael J. Farmer and Captain Matthew Broderick. Those guys fucking cared about me. It wasn't they needed me to get up and running because they had to put a checkbox, as in they had this many troops ready to be active and combat ready. It was they knew that I needed to be ready for combat. I needed to be safe so I could be mentally ready. They genuinely cared about their troops' health. And that was it. And I tell people that all the time, like, yeah, I have a lot of cool coaching pedigrees, but like none of that means shit if you are a coach and you trained under Dave Spitz, and you trained under Danny Carmago for a year, and you trained under fucking Zygmunt for a year. But you don't actually genuinely care whether your athlete gets better or learns something every time they come into your gym. It doesn't mean shit. And I tell people that in the USAW ones also, I'm like, the key to being a good coach is you care. And that's where, like we were talking, athlete A that lives in Iowa or Idaho and has 2 athletes that are like, we trust you to teach us weightlifting.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go fucking spend millions of dollars on certifications. You have to get to know them, get to know what scares them, get to know what makes them happy, get to know their weaknesses, their strengths, and then develop on that. And every time they come in, try to make them enjoy training as well as also challenge themselves and get better.
Mm.
And that perpetually adds up on top of itself and builds and grows, and you start becoming a coach.
Yeah. Is there anything kind of looking back on this, immense amount of time you spent kind of dedicated to developing what is now 4-star? Is there anything you would have done differently, or you feel like you kind of missed the mark on?
In terms of like the business or coaching?
Let's go with both.
I wasted a lot of money in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
lots of bad business plans that I thought were like what I needed because I was young. And now like one of my greatest stories, we were in the gym for like 6 months and we were lifting on like these just quote unquote these crappy wooden and rubber mats. And I was like, no, I want 4-star to be nice. So I paid I think it was like $3,000 to have this guy that does metal work up here like make platform metal frames and paint them like blue, red, and white, like our gym colors. And I had those made, and then literally like within 9 months we stopped using them. And you know what we went back to? We went back to plywood and crappy rubber.
Exactly.
It was like, wow, cool. So I have 3 of them upstairs and one in my garage now that I repainted black and white for my garage gym. But like, fucking huge dump of money, man. I could have used that $3,000 elsewhere so easy. So like business decisions like that happen. Mm-hmm. Business is different. Like running a weightlifting gym, the business side of it is totally, in my opinion, like it's unrelated to the coaching side of it. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of good gyms out there that run great business models that have crappy coaches. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of really crappy gyms that have fantastic coaches. Yeah. They're 2 different animals. I think, without going too much in a tangent, I think one thing that a lot of people do is they think that they want to run a gym, whether it be CrossFit or weightlifting, because they love being in the gym. Mm-hmm. And once reality shows of like, fuck, this is a lot to do, mm-hmm. It doesn't go well. It does not go very well. Or they start to resent and hate the sport. Mm-hmm. As a coach, I think as a coach, I wish I was more vocal sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I don't be vocal because I try to let the athletes learn. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can talk as much as you want as a coach, but until they learn the lesson themselves, it's just not going to stick. Mm-hmm. Telling someone like, hey, you're starting to move a little weird, like your back bothering you, you're like, yeah, it's bothering me a little. It's like, okay, well, why don't we take it off today? It's like, no, I'm fine. It's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, I'll be fine. And then like that adds up after like 3-4 days, and then they have to be out of the gym for a week because they tweaked their back. Mm-hmm. It's like, man, I should have spoke up. But then you sit there and you're like, if I would have spoke up, they would have fucking not listened anyways. Mm-hmm. It's like, so that's one thing. There's a couple of cases I probably could have been like, I should have spoke up for my athletes or even the coaches that were under me, that I could have had spoke up.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously know what you did well. I mean, in the sense that you've been able to survive this long, develop, a successful business / gym. Do you feel like there are still things that you need to continue refining and working on and developing as a coach? I mean, and as a businessman?
I'm looking for ways to get out and go learn again. Like I miss those education years. Mm-hmm. Like I'm constantly, that's why I work now with like Carlos Andica in Colombia, because I want to see what he's doing with these younger Colombian athletes, mm-hmm. because his team is taking over down there. He's building a lot of good athletes that are with him and not just in this typical national training center in Bogota. Mm-hmm. So he's starting to work with a bunch of people down there and starting to build this thing out. And I'm like right there trying to hear and talk. And I do his programming, so I know what he's doing with them, personally and physically. And then I can sit there and ask him, like, why am I doing this? You know, the other day he had me, I had taken like 2 weeks off due to just busy time with the holidays and like my own life shit. And coming back, he had me like squatting, and he knows I have bad knees, but he had me squatting like only to 90 degrees and fast. And he's like, squat down into 90 degrees and fast. And like, I was able to sit there and be like, okay, why? You know, the same thing I ask out of my athletes. I was like, if you don't understand, ask. That way you can buy into it. And he talked to me about like how it helps with the potential explosive rate of the fast twitch muscle fibers and gets the joint and leg ready for the work that's going to come and stuff like that. I was like, cool. And I learned all that, and now I can incorporate it into my own athletes if they need to take 2 weeks off on a vacation versus just sending them right back into the fire of like squat, snatches, clean jerks. A little bit more pre-thought out return to lifting, so to say.
Right.
But yeah, man, I miss being able to sit there and just be like, I'm going to Bogota or I'm going to Colombia for 3 weeks to go learn under Carlos. I'm going to, I have an open-ended invite to go train with Matias with Team Spain that I, acquired. And like, God, I want to go do that so bad. Like, and I got a kid now, and I'm just like, my wife's just waiting for me to sit there and pull that card when I need to. So those types of things I really miss. And I read literature and I watch stuff that people post and I listen. And I like hearing what newer coaches are doing because I think I don't want to be one of those stuffy coaches where it's like, well, look at this guy trying to reinvent the wheel. It's like, no, who gives a fuck? Right. If it helps, it helps. So,
are you open if people listen to this and they think, well, Matt Adamcheck is someone I want to learn from, and they happen to reach out or want to come up to the gym for a few days or so to check it out?
Yeah, 100%. I obviously with the COVID shit going on, it's a little bit more difficult. And Michigan's one of the more unique cases going on right now, unfortunately. No, I've had plenty of interns that have come here. I've had plenty of people that work out and just kind of shadow and hang out. And I'm more than open to that because at the end of the day, like this is my livelihood. I made that dice roll on. I'm going to have a career in the sport that doesn't make any money. So the more people that are doing it and creating a cool weightlifting environment, more people are going to see our sport and want to do it, which then is just going to create more weightlifters. So I'm always open to that. And, I was doing this thing called Task Force Weightlifting, which was like an online weightlifting course that eventually I'll have back up and running when I know my kid's not going to be screaming in the background while I try to teach that. And it's all about remote education. So like I basically was trying to fill a plug where like an athlete that lives in the middle of Oklahoma or in Texas or in Alaska that can't like go to a weightlifting gym because there just isn't simply any of them by them. They can do this online course with me, and it's a month-long course and learn from the ground up, physics and standpoint and like concepts and review video and like know how to train and program. And like that's one thing that I'll be getting up and running here again. It's a task of weightlifting stuff. But yeah, it's got to be open, man. People have to be open to learning, and they have to be open to teaching each other, because that's at the end of the day how we're going to produce the top athletes in this country.
Yeah. Well, there's always, there's a lot of information, and you mentioned Bud Charniga and how he kind of translated all of those texts, and we could all read the same book, but I think being able to apply it or being able to understand it would differ from person to person to person. So sometimes it takes a Matt Adamcheck explaining it to fully understand it, or a Dave Spitz or a Max Ada, or, we could essentially be saying the same thing. And this is kind of what you see with technique is the reason different athletes work with different coaches is just, it's maybe it's learning style, maybe it's personality preference. It's a lot of things that change, even if all of the underlying, right? Because the basic like concepts in physics don't change, right? Gravity is
exactly. I love the technique argument. The technique argument is the best because first of all, technique Technique defined as technique is something an athlete does repetitively.
Mm-hmm.
And I always get a kick out of when people are like, well, my technique is blah. And I'm like, I watch them lift and it's different. Like 5 out of 10 lifts. And I'm like, that's not technique. That's you trying to imitate a technique. You do not have a technique yet. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's really reading the athlete. I think that's one of the big things I learned from Ivan was this thing called the Cuban selective system. And long story short, Cuba was super successful in their sports that they competed in. And you had a very small population base, but then you had top tier competitors. Mm-hmm. Versus you had Russia and China, very large population bases, and also top tier competitors. So how did Cuba take a country where they have low population and they're even more closed in? Mm-hmm. And they basically created training programs from the athletes very early on after being in like the basic school, aka like as they were youths, once they had an actual movement pattern down. And it became individualized really right out the gate, very quickly. And those athletes would have a more individualized program to help them harness their potential and work on their weaknesses versus this canned programming concept. Mm. Because when you run a canned programming, like let's say me and you are good at snatches, but somebody else is not, mm-hmm. and the whole program is just developed around snatch development, like we're not going to get much development on our clean and jerk that we need practice on.
Right.
So like they did really good with that. And that's basically when I came back from Ivan's, I was like, we're not running a team program anymore. Mm. Like we are running individualized. And I saw huge amounts of growth on that.
The one thing
it's hard, man.
Well, that's what I was wondering. How do you?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's an immense amount of work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. How do you make it work? So if we're talking about in a situation where you have 30, 40 athletes, how do you? This is going to sound really, really crude, but how do you like take shortcuts, or what kind of rules of thumb do you have to make that process happen faster?
So it's like I was talking in the beginning. Not everyone needs to be individualized, right? We talked about like the technical movement needs to be there,
right?
And I think there's a psychological aspect of like I'm on individualized programming,
right? And
it makes people feel special,
right?
But again, we have to draw the line somewhere, or we're just going to overwork ourselves for unnecessary shit. And it's like, okay, cool. And this is something I did because I was a business owner. Mm-hmm. And I've made like a lot of adjustments to my business lately, but I'm happy with them. And I would have people that were just hobbyist lifters. And I respect, again, hobbyist lifters, but they really didn't need individualized programming. Mm-hmm. But they wanted it. So like that business standpoint is like, well, if they want it, let's do it. And it's like, nope, shouldn't have done that. And that's that we could go back and be like, nope, should have said no. Mm-hmm. Saying no is important. And because they could have still gotten better on the gym. Like we do run a gym program. We just are very hands-on with it here now. Mm-hmm. Like John could come in and do the gym programming, but when we sit down and talk and be like, listen, you're not doing split jerks yet because you're not ready. So these are going to be power jerks. Mm-hmm. And then your squats, take the percent up by 5 because you're ready.
Right.
So like, that's how we manage that. But like really people get on individualized programming once I'm confident that their consistency in the technical movements is where I want it. Mm-hmm. Before I start investing a shit ton of time on micromanaging their movements and trying to fix little tidbit things. Because I can't get your turnover better or on your snatch better if you're still pulling from the floor like an asshole.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I filter that out. And like I used to write, I think it was like 37 individual programs. Jeez. And I'm down to like 12 or 13 now. Mm-hmm. And it's so much nicer. And I can give those athletes a lot more time and thought and investment on it. But I had to sit there with myself and just have like come to Jesus meetings with some of these people of just like, I think you can probably just really benefit from the gym programming. Mm-hmm. You'll have excellent coaching. We'll modify your gym programming when needed. And they continue to all get good and get better. So they're getting what they want out of the gym.
Yeah.
And then with the individual athletes, I can really like hunker down.
And if we've learned anything from, Cal Strength, it's that you can have one base program and see a lot of good success with very good athletes. And a lot of that comes down to what, in your opinion as a coach, what do you think is more important? Everyone doing the same thing and the camaraderie, or everyone doing things unique to them? And those things aren't mutually exclusive, right? You can be doing mostly the same thing, but still have, as you said, the percentages changes, the exercise is slightly changed. Most people are operating on a similar competition schedule, so you're going to look at like off-season and season stuff a little similarly. So it's not like terribly different, and I think there are a lot of perks. But as you mentioned, right, it's where's the athlete at? Meet them there. The last question, because we're like an hour 5, and I'm just curious. Again, this is kind of, if I were to talk to all of the Russian sports scientists who wrote the Russian texts, I'm sure I would come away with ideas of what they wrote about, and it being, slightly different in practice.
Yeah, now they're allowed to. Now they're allowed to have opinions.
Right. So you've spoken to Bud, and you've spoken to Bob, and you've spoken to Ivan. Like, you've spoken to a lot of coaches who have probably written a lot and talked a lot about their methods. What have you found is actually different in person, right? Different working with them. So different working with coaches who have written, Bud, for example, writes a lot about the Russian system, and people just assume they would know what he's doing or know what it would look like. But what are some of those like nuanced points that when you actually work with a coach in person tends to not pan out quite the same way? Is there anything that sticks out, or is that just like?
I think for Bob, for example, Bob definitely has a background in this Russian weightlifting concept and how he programs and stuff like that. Exercise selection is not as varied as you would normally see. You can basically assume you're getting like one of the same 18 movements from Bob. Every now and then he'll swap them out. And traditionally, like, depending on what era of Russian weightlifting, you're going to see high exercise selection or lower. So you can kind of know that you're getting that from him. Ivan would be very upfront with like how much exercise selection you have. Like at the bottom of your spreadsheet, it would say like you're doing out of 31 movements this 12-week cycle, you will do 31 movements. And then you could see as you went into like a competition prep phase, it went down to 22.
Yeah.
And you could see that the volume and intensity. Bud, when I trained with him for the short time in his garage, actually training with him, he was very much like, just keep lifting and I'll watch. He was very quiet, like in terms of like, he didn't sit there and just like coach every rep. Like I would do it, and I wasn't used to that. I would like do a rep and I'd look over at him. He'd be like, okay, sit and rest. Like I was looking for like that consistent feedback every rep, and he wasn't going to give it. Which you go there and you're like looking at this guy who you respect as like a genius in weightlifting, and you want that feedback and you're not getting it. So it's like, fuck, that's frustrating. It's like, was this an ass day? And you leave and he's like, I'll see you tomorrow. And you're like, fuck. Whereas Bob was never, he's not shy with telling you if it's like not good. Which I do the same thing with Bob. I definitely am a patient coach because of Bob Morris, because I was not a patient coach before him. He taught me how to be patient. Which is, I think, my biggest thing about being a coach is I've learned his patience, and people know that I'm patient with them, so they're never worried like I'm gonna fucking give up on them. Which is huge for athlete confidence,
Right.
But I get called an asshole because I also do the thing Bob does and Ivan did very well, which is like, that's not gonna cut it. You need to do that again, and like being just relentless with it. And like it pisses athletes off, man, when you sit there and you're just like, they get done with a double at like 85, 88%. They think it's great. And you look at them, you're like, that's not good enough. Like, oh, what do you mean? It felt so good. It's like, it's not good enough. You can do better. And like just that relentless search for the best an athlete can pull out of themselves sometimes gets misconstrued as like coach is an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, coach, like we're actually trying to make sure you do it right. So when the time comes to do it right, there's not even a question of why he's going to do it right.
Right.
It's just going to happen. So those three those would kind of be those examples if I hit the question right.
Yeah, that was perfect, and I think it was an excellent way to kind of wrap up not only kind of what you pulled from the coaches, but kind of give people an idea of how you coach. I remember Bob Morris. I can recall like listening to I think Greg and Ariel Ford talk about him. I heard he was kind of like relentless, right? And like
he's known as No Mercy Morris, man.
Yeah,
all my coaches are like volume coaches. I had Ivan Rojas who literally threw like 400, 500 reps at me a month. I had Bob who did the same thing. I was doing my own programming, but Bud would just tell me to do it again. And like Lars was a volume coach. So all my coaches are volume coaches. That's why like my top athletes, like when they switch over, like an athlete switches over to me, the first like 3 weeks, they're like, I can train 4 days a week. I'm like, cool, you'll train 3. Because you need to get ready to this shit. Like I've recently started working with Lindsay Arisman and Zach Burks in the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. And like, they just now are starting to get used to the volume. Mm-hmm. And then like Caitlin Cooper, who's one of my top females, she like, people look at her program and they're like, you're on fucking drugs. Mm. And it's like, no, mentally, she's not on drugs. She's not physically on drugs. She just is built into this volume for the last 3 years to where now the girl can sit there and do waves at 85, 90, 95% of snatch or clean and jerk for 6 wave sets.
Jeez.
And then at the end, she's like, okay, to continue training. It's taken years for her body to get up to that. But that's what my coaches told me and taught me and how I got decent at weightlifting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Bob was definitely the worst out of all of them without anything, because it was like the volume was a lot, but then you would send him your videos and like Ariel could attest to this, or Donovan, anyone that worked with him, and just he'd respond with like, we'll try again Tuesday. You're like, son of a bitch. So
that's awesome. I have to say, like, from all of the podcasts I've listened to and just reading what you've written, I had no idea this is what I should have expected out of a podcast. So I'm really glad we were able to make this work. And for people for people who want to know more and want to kind of reach out and get to know 4-Star, get to know Matt, either programming, coaching, whatever business, where can they find you on like all the social media accounts?
Yeah. Anyone can reach out. You can email me at our website. Our website's going to have all the information. It's 4starstrength.com. My email is m.adamcheck@gmail.com. That's just the easiest one. Instead of explaining like 4-Star. Then like at 4-Star Strength on social, on Instagram, at coach_Adamcheck, ADAMCHECK. And yeah, anyone's welcome to reach out about anything. I can answer emails and messages all day long because I have a new 9-month-old. Well, not new, but a 9-month-old. So I'm up at like 2:30 a.m. answering emails. So it's all good. And yeah, I mean, if everyone listening just takes one thing away from this, is like, as a coach, just show your athletes you care and you genuinely care, and you'll do well. And then as an athlete, like, it all comes down to discipline. Mm-hmm. And it's what is your level of discipline to do what you actually say you want to do. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic way to kick this off, and to wrap it up. So for everyone listening, I say this, infrequently, but maybe I should go give this a rating. I hear that it helps. Share it with your friends, your family.
Yeah, rate this guy, man. He's got 22 reviews, and they're all good ones. So.
Yeah, like I say, I don't care if it's a 1-star or a 5-star, but as long as you're being honest and upfront, that's fine. Thanks again for tuning in to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, and we will catch you guys on the next episode.